Hi, my name is Paige Binder, and this is my presentation of the Tomlinson Model. Um, so to start, the Tomlinson Model is a flowchart that helps teachers to remember the steps to differentiating in your classroom. And it starts at the very top that differentiation should be a proactive response to learners, meaning that you're not doing these things after the fact. You need to know your students before you start teaching so that you can appropriately differentiate and reach them. And next it says mindset, because it's very important that teachers believe that their students can learn the content after it's been differentiated. The principles are in the green. So an important principle in differentiating is the learning environment, which means that your students should feel safe and welcome in your classroom, along with the fact that there should be materials at the ready for whatever they need. Quality curriculum should be good, rich curriculum that lends itself to differentiating. Assessment to inform means that you're not doing assessments just to do them, you're doing them to inform the next thing that you teach. So for example, if I did an exit ticket on adding to 10 and I saw that some students didn't understand it and some did, then that means the next day that those students who did not understand, I need to reteach, and the students who did, I can challenge them more. Address differences. You need to know that your students are not all going to learn the same way, and be knowledgeable about how they are going to learn. And managing a DI classroom can be a little more difficult, obviously, because everyone is not doing the same thing. So you need to be able to manage different activities going on at the same time. So there are different ways that teachers can differentiate. They can differentiate the what, which would be content, process, product, or effect. So if you're differentiating the content, you're differentiating what the students are actually learning. If you're differentiating the process, then you're differentiating how they are practicing what you're learning. If they're differentiating the product, then you're changing the end result. So that could be the last activity, the way they take a test. The other thing that a teacher can differentiate is the affect. So that's pretty much the climate of the classroom. So they can change their seats, flexible seating, how they ask for help, who they work with. These are things that we can differentiate. If they would prefer to work alone, then they can work alone. If they would prefer to work in a group, then they can work in a group. And then lastly, the hows of differentiation are how you're going to change the content, the process, the product, or the affect based on the kid's readiness, interests, or learning profile. So their readiness is how knowledgeable they are about that subject, or if they're ready to move on to that next thing. Their interests are obviously things that they like, things you know that they're interested in that might keep them more engaged in an activity, or their learning profile, which is how they learn. Of examples of how I could differentiate based on these things. If I were to differentiate content based on readiness, I would be changing the actual content of what I teach. So for example, if I were to teach a math lesson on double-digit addition, if I were to teach the friends who are not as ready to learn that, I probably would be using numbers like 20 plus 10 or 10 plus 10. But if I were to be giving my students a challenge for the ones who do understand it a little bit more, I would be teaching them like 25 plus 24, and then maybe even taking it a step further and doing some regrouping. In that same way, if I were differentiating on readiness and I differentiated the process, I might change the number of practice problems that my students have to do. If I were changing the product, I might give some students like a number bank to help them, or a totally different activity to do at the end of that lesson. Or if I were to change the effect of the classroom, then I could maybe work with a small group, and some kids work independently based on their readiness. My guided reading groups, I could change the content by changing the books that we read based on what I know that my kids are interested in. I could change the process of, let's say, like answering comprehension questions. I could let them draw a picture instead of write a sentence if I know that's what they're interested in. Or I could have them type on the computer instead of write, even though that's kind of hard for first graders sometimes. If I were changing the product based on interest, same with that comprehension idea, I could say we're doing beginning, middle, and end. I could have my kids choose from a choice board. They could do a skit with a friend. They could write a song. They could draw a comic, or they could just write the answer, the beginning, middle, and end of the story. And if I were to change the effect based on interest, again, they could choose if they want to work by themselves or with a group. They could choose flexible seating based on what they like and what motivates them. And then lastly, learning profile. And there's obviously a bunch of different ideas on the kinds of intelligences that people have, but it's always important to know if a kid is more of an auditory learner or a visual learner, or if they like music to help them learn, if they need to move to help them learn. So for content, the idea of entry points is really easy to add into any lesson. You obviously are not just going to want to teach with one mode of showing them the information. So I might need to add some pictures, I might add a song, I might add a video, some sort of personal experience to connect to content based on learning profile. I could change the process of them using that information based on how I know they learn. So if I know a kid is a strong auditory learner, I might let them have like a conversation with another kid and talk it out. Or if I know that they're a visual learner, maybe they need to see a book to help them understand. Or if they're a kinesthetic learner, maybe we do some sort of movement in between an activity, or I give them something that they can touch for tactile learners. If I were changing the product based on learning profile, that would be another like choice board thing. Let them choose how they want to show me what they know, based on what's going to be easiest for them to show. And then learning profiles for the climate of the classroom could be, if I know those students need peace and quiet, then we'll be more quiet. If I know they prefer to have a little bit of music in the background, or talking with their classmates, then that is how we could differentiate that. What's important to know with the Tomlinson model is that you're not going to be doing every single one of these things all at the same time. It kind of goes interchangeably. Now, the principles have to kind of stay intact there at the top. You need to have those things in your classroom or in your way of teaching. But, you might just choose to differentiate the content based on readiness, or you might just choose to differentiate the process based on interests. You might just choose to differentiate the product based on the learning profiles of your students. You're not going to do all these things every single time. You're not going to differentiate based on all three of these things for all four of the what's, all for one lesson. But it is important to make sure you're keeping these things in mind, even if it is just a little tweak in a lesson, because like we learned in that neglected strengths article, that everyone benefits from learning in a way that is going to reach them. And if you're not differentiating for your students and you're teaching them all the same way, doing the same activity, there's obviously going to be some students who are going to slip through the cracks. And so it's very important to know your learners.